Welcome to the AlzAuthors podcast. We're so glad you found us. We're the global community of authors writing about Alzheimer's and dementia from personal experience to light the way for others. I'm Marianne Shuko, a registered nurse, author, and dementia daughter.
And I'm Christy Byrne-Yates, a licensed educational psychologist, dementia daughter, AlzAuthor, and coach focused on the sandwich generation. Please join us for bi-weekly episodes with our authors as we talk about their dementia journeys, sharing intimate details and painfully obtained knowledge to help others currently on that path.
We hope these stories offer you comfort and support as we strive to break the silence and stigma surrounding a dementia diagnosis.
May one of our authors speak to your experience.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Hi everyone, welcome to an episode of Books Chit Chat, brought to you by AlzAuthors and Aging and Amazing. This episode features Ruth Stevens and her book, Stage 7, which was originally written and produced as a play, but then Ruth wrote it as a work of fiction. This episode is moderated by Andrea Couture, a member of the AlzAuthors team and author of Embracing What Remains, a memoir of her time with her father during his dementia journey while she was also raising 3 young children. Now, let's get to the show.
Hi, I'm Susan of AlzAuthors. When I was a caregiver for my mother with dementia, resources to educate and offer support were hard to come by. AlzAuthors believes in the power of storytelling to support and encourage those impacted by Alzheimer's and dementia. Custom Caregiver Collections is a customized collection of memoirs, novels, caregiver guides, children's books, and more. This collection of well-vetted books comes displayed in a beautifully crafted wooden tabletop bookshelf with AlzAuthors branding. Custom Caregiver Collections supports our goal of bringing real books to real people in real places and are perfectly suited for senior care communities, senior centers, doctors' offices, memory cafes, and professional or personal libraries. If you or your organization is interested in ordering or building a custom caregiver collection, we can guide you through choices of books written in many categories to support your needs. Want to build your own book collection? Contact us at alzauthors.com/ccc to get started.
Hello and welcome to Books Chit Chat with Aging and Amazing, featuring Ruth Stevens and her novel, Stage 7. I'm Christy Byrne-Yates, a team member at AlzAuthors, the global community of authors writing about Alzheimer's and dementia from personal experience to light the way for others. My co-host, Marianne Shuko, has just returned from visiting family, so she won't be joining us at this time, but she'll be back for our next Books Chit Chat. Marianne is a founder and manager at AlzAuthors and the author of Blue Hydrangeas, an Alzheimer's love story. Our moderator, Andrea Couture, is the moderator for our book club. Drea is the author of Embracing What Remains, a touching memoir of her time caring for her father who had dementia while she was raising 3 young children. I'd like to introduce some of the members of our team who are with us today. We are also joined by Allie Parker of Aging and Amazing. Aging and Amazing is a wonderful organization that values healthy aging and caregiving. One side of the organization focuses on care management. The other side of the organization focuses on their signature online community. Within this online community, over 200 members from around the world share their stories, resources, and tips to help support caregivers and those who are aging. Check out their online community to learn more. We're all aging and amazing. We also have with us Vicki Tapia, and Vicki is a founder and management team member, and she is the author of Somebody Stole My Iron, a family memoir of dementia, along with several other books, I believe. So she's a wonderful, prolific writer. Let's see. We have last month's author, Flory Muñat, is here. Thank you for coming, Flory. And I also see another one of our team members, and that is Sue Fagaldi-Lick, who is the author of Gravel Road Ahead, amongst many other titles. And she's currently pulling together our poetry anthology. So I want to thank all of the people who are from our management team to be here, and Allie from Aging and Amazing, and our other authors. So it's really wonderful to see such a great community supporting everyone. At this point, I want to introduce Drea Couture, who's going to lead our book club today. So Drea, take it over.
Okay, thank you, Christy. Hi, everyone. I am here to introduce and discuss our book for this month. It was called Stage 7, written by Ruth Stevens. And if you haven't read the book, that's okay. We did not require it as part of being part of the club. You can just be here to listen or discuss or ask questions. And if you haven't read it, or if you have, this is a little reminder of what the book is about. In Stage 7, a sweet but uptight single mom develops an attraction to an older man at an Alzheimer's facility where her mother and his wife are patients. This debut novel examines a difficult topic in a humorous, tender, and uplifting way as it explores the many forms of love we experience in modern life. USA Today bestselling author Abby Waxman called it a romance with emotional maturity and true connection, delightful and touching. I have to agree. I finished the book last week and it was excellent. I would also like to now introduce Ruth Stevens, who is the author, and I'm going to read a little bit about her to you guys. Ruth Stevens likes to create stories that will make you laugh and cry. Stage 7, her debut novel, was inspired in part by real-life experiences dealing with her mother's Alzheimer's disease and decline. It is based on her stage play of the same title, produced in 2018. Her second play, a dark comedy, was named a finalist in the 2019 Gary Marshall Theater New Works competition. Ruth is a former public relations professional, New York City and LA, and current member of the Dramatists Guild of America, the Women's Fiction Writers Association, and AlzAuthors. She has been writing professionally for her entire career, including advertising campaigns and hundreds of articles for magazines, newspapers, and journals. But creative writing is her passion. Ruth is also a fiction story acquisitions editor with AlzAuthors. So welcome, Ruth.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody for coming.
So Ruth, you have a pretty established career, and it's impressive. It's obvious in your writing too. Like I said, I finished Stage 7 last week and I was really impressed. And I have to say, because as a memoir author, I wrote a true story, but you turned, it sounds like maybe some of your story into fiction, which I find to be very creative. But also I connected with it, even though it was fiction. I felt a lot of connection with it as a daughter, of someone with Alzheimer's. So I want to ask you if you can expand a little bit more on what kind of inspired you to write the book, or some of your experience with Alzheimer's personally.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, the main source of inspiration was my mother, Muriel Stevens. So Muriel was really an amazing lady. She was a community leader. She was manager of the Rhode Island Philharmonic Orchestra. She was really loved and respected by everybody, and was like my best friend too. And late in her life, fortunately, very late in her life, she got Alzheimer's and became like a different person. And it was a very tough adjustment, for all of the family. And I was a long distance caregiver, and she was in Rhode Island still, and I am in California. But I knew that I wanted to write about it someday. But in a fictional way. It wasn't going to be a memoir. In fact, it wasn't even going to be a book. I think, as you mentioned in the bio, I wrote it originally as a stage play.
Yeah.
So,
It's impressive. Wow.
well, and then there was one other source of inspiration too, which was around the time that I was starting, thinking about writing this story. A very good friend of mine had a sister-in-law who was making daily visits to a memory care facility. And she was visiting, both of her parents were in this facility. And she would go every day, and she got to know this much older man who was there visiting his wife, who was very, very late stage dementia patient, didn't speak, didn't walk or talk, or she wasn't responsive. And the two of these people fell in love. And I didn't know them, but I heard the story, as it progressed, as the romance progressed. I heard it from my friend, and I just thought that was really great, great material. And somehow it combined with the story of my mother's dementia into this, play that became Stage 7, play and later novel. So that was where the inspiration came from.
Okay. So a lot of it is based on truth, but you've decided to turn it into fiction. So a lot of the Alzheimer's stuff you discuss is accurate, at least in your experience.
Right. The character of Dolly, who is the mother of Barbara in the play and the book, was the one who was based on my mother. And, and even some of the medical stuff about her was fairly close to the truth. And there's a doctor, a concierge doctor in the story called Dr. Sam in the story, but he was inspired by my mother's real life concierge doctor, who was my lifeline. I don't know how I would have dealt with this whole thing coast to coast without somebody like him. So there was a lot that was founded in reality, but a lot of the characters were fictional, and the love story, even though it was based on something that happened to two people I heard about, I didn't know these people. So, this was a story that came out of the imagination.
Yeah. I think it was excellent, though, and very relatable. Something I wanted to talk about, too, is why you chose, and I'm assuming you chose, but I also admire, is how you talked about, you went across the generations. You went from the mother and the daughter with, Dolly and Barbara and Vicky, with their mom, all the way to Sarah, the daughter of Barbara. And you also did, Jack is the husband visiting his wife, but you go down to his son and then you go down to his grandson. So was that on purpose? And why did you do that?
I don't remember making a conscious decision to do that.
Okay.
But I guess that there were times when generations from my family congregated to see my mother. And when we got together like that as a whole family, which we didn't that often because we were all spread out geographically, it made me realize that everybody's impacted, when a family member gets dementia. It's not just the patient or the primary caregiver. It's everybody, through the generations. And so I wanted to kind of explore how that would impact the different members of these two families and how their relationships would intertwine in the different generations.
I mean, I don't know about Christy. I know that kind of comes up for her too, but I think it's really important that you talk about that because it makes even more relatable to more of the readers out there, like I think a grandchild could pick up this book and relate to it. I related to it as a daughter, like I'm sure there's husbands and wives out there. So I like that you did that.
Oh, thank you. Well, and I wanted her to be a sandwich generation mom, Barbara, because, and Christy is the expert in that. I mean, this is what she specializes in, that there are so many women or parents in the sandwich generation right now who are caring for a parent and for a child. So I thought that would be very relatable to have Barbara dealing with that. It was not my personal situation. By the time my mother was diagnosed, my son was grown and out of the home and, living in New York independently. Okay. So it wasn't my experience.
Yeah, you said there's something in the book too that sort of pulls that together, and which I found important too in my story was, and I don't think this is a direct quote, but it will probably spark you to remember it. Something about helping the dementia patient remember, but more so you help the other family remember their loved one. That's why you sort of like why we get together with the, the loved one who has Alzheimer's or dementia. It's really for us too to remember them, not so much for them to remember us, because that part is sort of lost on them, at some point. So it's really about remembering them, to each other and for each other, don't you think?
Yeah, I do. And I think in the book, and this might be what you're thinking of, Barbara decides to keep kind of a diary of her mother's memories of milestones in her mother's life. And so she's trying to preserve a record of this for the rest of the family and for everybody else.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's what's important, for people reading this book to kind of take away from it too, some of those lessons and tips almost, how to get through this. So let's see. I think something that came up too that I think people would relate to in these situations is the husband's denial of his wife's Alzheimer's. That he didn't want to tell people because it would make it more real. And that was something I kind of went through the book and I highlighted things I connected with that I thought a lot of people would too. I think that happens a lot in an Alzheimer's diagnosis, is we keep it to ourselves thinking if we don't tell anybody, it's not the truth. And
right.
That's, part of the acceptance. So I think that's helpful for people to read that need that comfort to know that that's a normal stage, but you probably shouldn't stay there, Right. Speaking of stage, I have to say, before I read the book, I really thought it was about a theater type theme, which you do tie in because the grandson's an actor. But I didn't realize it also represents stage 7 of Alzheimer's.
Right.
Right.
And the title is kind of intentionally ambiguous, so that people might think it has to do with theater, and it sounds kind of upbeat. And Dolly, the mother, Barbara's mother, was in fact very involved in a prominent role in the local theater company. So yeah, there is that, but it does refer to the final most devastating stage of Alzheimer's, which some patients never reach. And part of the reason for that title is that Barbara is kind of a control freak. I mean, she's a lovely person and very sweet, but she's kind of OCD, and she makes a lot of lists and charts and spreadsheets and this kind of thing. And she feels that, like if she kind of keeps track of all her mother's behavior and tries to figure out the staging, that somehow she can control the whole thing. So,
yeah, and I think
newsflash, that doesn't really work in life.
No, but it makes a great character and gives her a little depth, right? But I think the title, I just wanted to discuss it because even just as a reader, it's really, I like the way that you did that, and it's creative and it does draw your reader in, and so kudos for that. You kept me in the dark until, let's see what else. Another thing, let's ask some questions. So this is specific to the book. So stage 7 is largely a story about love. And what are the different forms of love depicted in the novel? So I guess we sort of talked about that, because which of the characters are most transformed by love in the course of the story? You definitely have multiple love stories here. Do you want to expand on that, or do you want me to
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think it does cover a lot of bases. I mean, the romance between Barbara and Jack, and the way she finally opens herself up to love many years after a bad marriage would be the primary example of love in the book. But you've got her daughter who has a big crush on Jack's grandson. So you've got like puppy love, and you've got filial and parental love, and the long-term happy marriage that Jack had with his wife before she became ill. So it's. I tried to explore lots of different forms of love in the story.
Yeah, I mean, you have mother-daughter love and grandfather-grandson love. It's familial, it's romantic.
Right. And then sibling love, which is sometimes more like sibling hate in this book.
Yeah. Well, I think you captured that great, though. And you even talk about Barbara having an ex-husband, which I think is important, too. Those are all real life things that happen.
Right.
And, then you tie in someone trying to, deal with someone's disease and, gets complicated and kind of, heavy. And
there's something I would like to say that's actually in the interest of full disclosure. I did not originally write Stage 7 to help people through the caregiving journey. I wrote it as an entertainment. It was a stage play. So the idea was it was supposed to be funny, but also sad, and people would laugh, people would cry, and all that. And the play was produced, and there were 4 performances, and people did laugh and cry. I mean, it was pretty exciting. But then something happened, which I really had never expected, which was that after one of the performances, a woman from the audience came up to me and she said, I wasn't going to come to the play because I've lost my husband to Alzheimer's a few months ago. And so I thought it would just be too upsetting. But a friend of mine saw it yesterday and she said, you should go. It's funny. It's good. And she said to me, I feel like your play gave me permission to move on with my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's an awesome thing to hear about your work.
Yes. I mean, it's like if you hear that from one person, doesn't that make it worthwhile?
Yeah. So absolutely.
So that was what then inspired me to turn it into a novel and to kind of dig deeper into the whole caregiving thing and the characters and their motivations and into Alzheimer's.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a medical professional, neither are you, but you do have some really accurate stuff in it. For example, something that if someone read this book and had no idea about Alzheimer's, it does educate people pretty well on how a lot of people process the disease or go through it. And one thing you mentioned that I thought was really profound that a lot of people don't know is Alzheimer's really is reversed aging. You really do go from a fully formed functioning adult and you slowly edge backwards almost to infant stage. Right. And I'm talking physically, mentally too, obviously, but more so physically. And I think a lot of people don't know that. And I think that was something that you brought up in the book that I was impressed that you mentioned it before it came up, because I feel like a lot of people, you don't know.
Yeah. And I didn't know until when my mother was, a couple of years into the disease. I read a wonderful book called The Forgetting. It was written 25 years ago. And it talked about that. And that some cultures regard it as kind of normal because it's just your life now going in reverse.
Yeah.
And I somehow found it comforting to read that, and it made a huge impression on me, and that's why I worked it into the play and the book. So I'm glad you mentioned that. It just made such an impression on me to read. That some cultures regard this as a kind of a normal process, that I found it comforting when I was going through it with my mother.
Yeah, I think it's important to know. Do we have any questions from any readers or people attending that might want to ask a question for Ruth right now?
Yeah, let me open it up. Is there anyone who, Sue, would you like to Sue Fagaldi-Lick? Yeah.
The romance that happens with Barbara and the I can't remember his name, the older gentleman,
Jack.
He's still married, and so you got to look at the morality of this, and certainly when your spouse reaches a point, and mine did, they don't know who you are, they don't respond, and you do start looking at other people. Can you talk about that gray area where you're married but you're not married, and you start looking at other people?
Sure. Yeah, it was something I worried about when I first wrote it, that people would be offended by it and would object to it. And there have been a few who've said, well, I think they really should have waited till after his wife passed away. But overall, I think there's really a lot of support for Barbara and Jack getting together, because his wife, he had been taking care of her for many years, and she had finally gotten to a point where she didn't know who he was or who anybody was, and he found an opportunity for happiness, to move ahead with his life. And it wasn't an easy decision, but he was ready. And so I think that's, that was supported, like I say, by a lot of readers and audience members. And I think that's one of the reasons I kind of take the story to the point where we see what happens to everybody afterwards. Mm-hmm. And in the play, I did that too. I had an epilogue where you find out what happens, and I wasn't sure whether to do that. I thought maybe we end it where Helen's still alive, and then I realized that readers could probably swallow it better if they saw what would happen later. Does that answer your question, Sue?
Yeah, it is such a difficult place because your partner is alive. You're still technically married.
Yep.
But you don't have the benefit of an actual spouse at that point. So,
that's right. And of course, Scott, who's the Jack's grandson, he's the one family member who's really violently opposed to all this. Right. I think he is too, for selfish reasons, but with Scott, it's like he had adored his grandmother. She was his role model, and he can't, bear to see this going on.
It's a betrayal.
It is. It's not an easy situation for family members.
I think for me, when I read the book, I found that I had the same question as Sue did, but I guess I looked at it as, this is so real. And if you're not in it, it's so hard to realize how the loneliness that you feel just came through the page to me, and I felt for both Barbara and Jack. So hard that this was tough. And that's not to say that, I guess I just didn't go to a place of this is right or wrong. I just was like, I get that this is really hard. And gosh, the long journey that Alzheimer's can be for someone. And as I recall, Jack's wife, Helen, correct? She,
right.
She just had early stage, and she'd been ill for quite some time. So anyway, that was interesting.
Yeah, and there have been real life examples, of some public personalities who've had this situation, and it's been aired by the news media and so forth, and there's controversy about it, and so this is not unique by any means.
Right. And you didn't put out in there that you didn't make a judgment. You just shared the scenario. And so, I thought that was.
I was going to say, I think that it's realistic, and I think maybe it's taboo, but you know what? That's okay. It's fiction. You can do what you want. People can take from it what you want, but I think it's realistic. And I think there's, like Ruth said, there's people out there that it's happened, that they're going to read it and feel like, okay, because the thing about Alzheimer's and dementia, you cannot reverse it. It's not like someone dying from cancer who may magically be cured. Once you head down the Alzheimer's road, that's, there is a definite end to that, So
right.
I think that's part of the decision too, probably for some spouses to,
So, Dorothy, did you have a question or a comment?
Oh, I just wanted to say, I don't know if anybody else had the opportunity, but I had the great privilege and pleasure to see the play, Stage 7. And I have not finished the book, but reading it, it just refreshes everything. And I just want to say that, this whole part about, Barbara and Jack and the romantic, sort of development. I mean, in the play, it's very natural. These people caring for their loved ones. They spend time together. There's empathy and there's friendship, and it just develops naturally. There's no intent. Understandably, the other relatives are upset, but it's beautifully staged where it's just natural that two lonely people just seek comfort in each other's company, and it develops. So, but it's hard from the page maybe, but when I read it, I remember the play. And I think that's another dimension that you have to take when real people are acting. It just adds, those senses to you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It was great.
Thank you, Dorothy. Allie, you had a comment or a question?
Yeah, because I was also thinking about the same theme and question, because it is really interesting to think about. But one, I think it really shows the importance of self-care this to like a great degree, but like they both had been through so much with each of their spouses, and they claim the caregiver role in the last however many years of each of their lives with their spouse. And especially with Alzheimer's, we know it's incredibly difficult as it progresses. And so they each kind of claimed a caregiver route. They were still married, yes, legally and everything, but you're missing that romantic partner that you had for the first many decades of your life. And so finding that similar to what Dorothy said, finding that community with one another really kind of is what helped everything like blossom. But their roles with each other definitely shift to caregiver and less of a spouse. So they were, yeah, I thought it's really interesting to write about that and hear about it.
Thank you.
Do we have any other? Flory, did you have a question or a comment?
I do. Hi, Ruth. Thank you for writing this book. I have a question about your writing process and how you opted to write a play and then a fictional novel. I guess I'm curious about how you drew on your own personal experience with Alzheimer's and how that played out in your writing. And then did you feel, as you wrote about it, kind of at one step removed, did that have any like therapeutic effect on you? Did it help you process your own grief over the loss of your mother?
That's a very interesting question that I get asked a lot. And the answer might surprise you a little bit, which is not so much, because I think by the time I actually started to write the play, my mother had been gone a couple of years. I was really waiting to retire from my day job to do that. And so once I really sat down to write it, I was more removed from it. And because I've been writing professionally, I think my whole life, it was like, okay, this is my new writing job. This is my work now. So I was able to kind of step away from it emotionally. I think I became much more emotional about it later on after the book was published, and I connected with AlzAuthors and all these other people who had stories, some similar stories, some very different stories. But that's when it really took me back a lot more to reliving the experiences with my mother.
Makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions or comments from our group here? And it's okay if you haven't read the story yet. Maybe you're curious about something so far.
Okay. Do you want me to read a little bit?
Yeah, I was going to ask. Yeah, yes.
Okay. All right. So this passage is really almost at the beginning of the book. I mean, it's in the first chapter, and we're listening to Barbara, who's narrating. And Barbara says, 3 days had passed since my mother, Dolly Gordon, moved into the memory care unit at Tropical Gardens Assisted Living in Providence. When I called my older sister, I said, I've been tossing and turning for 3 nights. I keep wondering if Ma's lying awake every night too, frightened about being in a strange bed. Vicky responded with her customary charm. Put a cork in it, Barbara. Every place is a strange place to Ma now. I realize that, Vic. That's why I worry about her. This time I heard a muffled snort. I know. Worrying is what you do. Another snort. Anyway, it won't help matters for you to be lying awake exhausted. I wish you'd let me give you some Ambien. Vicky maintained a stash of prescription tranquilizers, potent enough to fell a herd of stampeding buffalo. You know I don't like that stuff, I said. I saw a scary study that said people who take Ambien are 4 times more likely to die. I thought we were all 100% likely to die, said Vicky. I don't know how you managed to be so cavalier about all this. Her snide responses never failed to irritate me. That's because you've already got the worry department fully managed. Look, I know you're doing 90% of the work where Ma's concerned. Let me lighten your load. Finally, I've been overwhelmed dealing with Ma, hoping my sister might offer to pitch in. By helping more, I asked. By medicating you, since you don't like Ambien, maybe a little Xanax. When are you coming to Tropical Gardens, I asked, changing the subject to mask my disappointment. I'll get over there as soon as I can, she said, but her tone was noncommittal. You know this is our busy time of year. Look, I've got a call coming in right now on the business line. Hugs to Ma. Vic, one last thing. I'm trying to schedule an appointment with a nurse, and I looked down at the call-ended message on my cell phone and realized my sister had already hung up, leaving me alone as usual to deal with our mother's worsening condition. I fought back tears. After 15 years as a single mom, sometimes I longed for someone to buoy me up, to keep me afloat, to lighten the burden of responsibility that pressed on me from all sides with the density of water. For now, I would have to keep on swimming alone. I think that, the whole uneven burden of care thing is very relatable to a lot of people, and it doesn't have to do necessarily with dementia care, any kind of caregiving. You have siblings, and it's more common than uncommon for somebody to be carrying the brunt of the load.
Yes.
I'm seeing a lot of nods.
I really related to that. You did so well with that sibling relationship. I thought that was great. So I'm sorry to butt in there, Andrea. It's yours.
No, it's fine. I was just going to say, I think you did do a great job. I'm glad that you brought in a sibling, because I think that's a huge part of the caregiving process or journey with a parent, is how the siblings manage it or agree or disagree, and how different personalities, bring something different to the situation. I mean, I definitely found myself laughing and crying with this book.
Good.
And now that you just read that passage, by the way, it was excellent. I feel like I was watching like a little episode of the Golden Girls, it was just, it's witty, but it's so realistic. Did you have a sibling or siblings when your mom had Alzheimer's?
Yes, I don't have a sister. I have an older brother. Oh. And so there were similarities in the situation in that even though I was in California and he was 20 minutes away from our mother, I was the one carrying 90% of the load like Barbara. And I think my brother even used that percentage. I mean, he fully acknowledged it. So it did fall on me. But the big difference was that my brother and I never disagreed on the important stuff. We always were in agreement on making important decisions about her care. We were on the same page with all that. So, Vicky was she was inspired by some real events, but she was a fictional character, and that relationship was a fictional one, which I got in there to add some humor and some conflict to the story.
Oh, it was very well done, I have to say. For someone who's trying to write fiction right now, I admire you, Ruth.
Thank you. I never tried to write, nonfiction. So, I mean,
I know, but creating characters to me is difficult. And so I really admire the writers that can do that.
Can I ask
What?
one question while
Yeah.
we're still back there? So, Ruth, did your brother ever see the play, and has he read the book, and what were his thoughts?
That's a really good question. No, has not seen the play for sure. He was actually supposed to be participating in this discussion, but couldn't make the new date. So we could have asked him, directly. I know his wife and daughter and other family members have read the book, but I don't think he has personally. And then, by the way, if that sounds shocking, I know so many authors who say that close family members haven't read their books.
Yeah, I don't believe my brother and sister have read mine. I think my sister is very clear. It's just, even though it's been many years, she's like, I don't know that I can, because it's too hard for her to hear that.
Well, yours is very, because it's so personal. But I've read once that Danielle Steele said she sold 1 billion books and her children had never read any of them.
Maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah, right.
I had a question. The place where they were staying, the assisted living place, sounded really, really nice. Better than the ones I've mostly experienced. Was that based on the real place where your mother was?
It was, but the place where my mother lived in real life was not a memory care unit. It wasn't even assisted living. It was a senior living, independent living facility where she owned her apartment, and it was very nice. But when she could no longer be independent, and we were faced with the decision, do we move her to California? Do we move her to assisted living or whatever? We ended up making the decision to have a live-in caregiver with her in her apartment. And that was the only way she could live there, was for, and then the family had to supply that. This was not a place that had tiered living. But we kept her there to the end. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so your mom stayed in her own place till the end. Okay, so that's interesting because so did my dad. But when I was reading this, I felt like you really supported the need for caregivers to maintain their own mental health. And so you really paint a nice picture of Jack finally giving in to nursing care for Helen and putting her in a facility. And I feel like that's a really important thing for readers who are experiencing that guilt or that feeling of not giving up the care, but really passing it to someone else, if they don't feel comfortable. So I'm happy that you did that, especially if you didn't have that direct experience. I think that's important.
Oh, good. Yeah. And I think that's one thing where reading fiction can help people who are dealing with these issues on their own, that it's common for caregivers to feel, just completely worn out and then feel resentful and tired and exhausted and sick of the whole thing. And then they feel guilty for having those feelings. But here you've got Jack, who's like the nicest guy in the world, and he's having those feelings. And so you read it and it's like, okay, well, maybe I'm not a terrible person after all.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's important. An important part of the journey of Alzheimer's is showing both those sides, sometimes. Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of fiction, really. For me, what I loved is I love the memoir and I love hearing what people experienced. There's something about fiction that we can really feel deeply about these characters, but we don't maybe dive in. So it's almost like we have this distance and it allows us to feel them differently, right? And I loved that. That's what, and even especially because all the complications that we've talked about here today, it's like those are very real, but because it's fiction, we don't maybe dwell on, it's like you said, some celebrities, right? It's this person and I'll never watch their movie again, or it's like we can,
right.
So I love that.
You read fiction and you empathize with the characters, but you are set back a little bit. It's only a story.
Yeah.
Although memoirs, to me, memoir kind of bridges the gap. I mean, it's nonfiction, but it tells a story too. And memoirs can be
for sure
extremely affecting, and sometimes in their own way, even more so, because, oh my gosh, this is a true story.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree. So let me ask you, Ruth, in general, what would you hope that your readers take from this book?
Well, I hope they would take from it, what I hope they'll take from my other work to come, which is that they will laugh and cry and, also feel that they've learned something and enjoyed the characters. But, in the case of Stage 7, some readers, I've had readers who, like that woman from the audience, have said that it helped them in some way with the issues they were dealing with personally. So that's great when it happens. It's certainly not something I expect with every reader. I mean, a lot of readers are reading this with their book club or whatever. Although I got to say I've done a lot of book club appearances, and it always gets into a personal discussion of the members. And I would say about half of the book club members I've met have had personal experience with some family member or close friend or something who
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Maybe you could tell us about I hate to interrupt again. Could you tell us about, I'm intrigued, Ruth, what are some of the things you're working on? What's next for you? Okay,
well, 2024 is a big year for me. I have 2 books coming out, a duology, which is like a trilogy, but when the author only got around to writing 2 books instead of 3. And they're being published by a traditional independent publisher called Black Rose Writing. And the first one comes out in September, and it's called My Year of Casual Acquaintances. And so at the beginning, it will sound, like another story about Barbara. The main character is a 50-year-old divorced woman, but she's very different from Barbara. And she's bitter that her husband has left her. And so she's decided to reinvent herself with a whole new life and just change everything about her life. And it's kind of episodic. Every month she meets up with a different person, some romantic, but some other types of acquaintances, and determined not to commit to anybody. And so every month there's kind of a story about that character, but through the course of this year, you kind of follow her overriding arc and see what happens to this character. So there's a lot of humor in it. Again, it's trying to be funny and sad, definitely lighter. There's a little bit of Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's seems to work its way, at least as a subplot or a subplot into everything I'm writing. But so that's coming in September. And then the sequel, called The Unexpected Guests, is only 3 months later. That will come out December of this year. And that's 3 of the characters from My Year of Casual Acquaintances, 3 alternating points of view. And we follow them in the events that come right after the first book in the series. So it's pretty exciting, and it's already proving to be a busy year. I'm just getting started with the process. So
it's awesome! Congratulations!
Thank you.
Right? Yeah. Many congrats. That's awesome.
Thank you.
I think it's really interesting how this started as a play. I think that's really cool, and how you turned the play into the book that it is now. And I just think, and the fact that it was played, I don't know what the right word would be, but like the fact that the play happened 4 times, and like you had not, that's really cool. I just think that's really amazing.
Yeah, that was, and so after that, I wrote another play, and then I started to shop them around, and I found out how hard it is to get a play produced. And so, but that was around the time I also decided to try expanding Stage 7 into a novel. And by the time I was really into it, we were into this pandemic thing where all the theaters closed down. And it was like, okay, I don't think I'm going to focus on playwriting for the foreseeable future. So I turned to fiction. Mm-hmm.
Nice. And I also think, like Drea said, I think writing fiction, I'm not a writer by any means at all, but I think writing fiction seems so challenging. So the fact that you could take someone else's story and make it into your own and connect your own experiences is just really neat.
Well, thank you.
Dorothy?
Ruth, it might be my memory, no pun intended here, but with the play, I know that you took some time between the play and then writing the book, because you said as a book, you had to develop some more of the story. Right. I don't remember Vicky. Was Vicky in the play?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just, that's when it's like, I don't remember, because I was so intent on Barbara and Jack and that whole story. And, I didn't remember Vicky at all.
I think the major characters from the book were in the play first, but I did have to add a lot of characters, to expand it into a novel. Or, one way of looking at it, I think the play script was about 15,000 words and the novel was 85,000. So you have to have a lot more stuff going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, that conflict was there. And actually in the, you saw an earlier reading, but in the production that I talked about, the woman who played Vicky was hilarious. She really played it for laughs, and it made it a lot lighter.
It helps.
Any desire to sell it as a screenplay and get some traction that way?
Yeah.
I know, right? Who says no?
Shop that around. That's awesome.
That's good.
Yeah, so I'd take screen, television, anybody who wants it, come get it.
That's right. That's right.
Don't discriminate.
Well, we are coming up towards the end of our time. Andrea, did you have some more that you want to say? Or Ruth, is there more that you'd like to share?
I have a very short passage that's like
Excellent.
A couple of paragraphs long that I think touches on another aspect of caregiving, which is the boredom.
Yeah.
And I think that's been discussed in prior meetings here. And this is, maybe a week after she's moved her mother into tropical gardens. I accompanied Ma to the midday meal and had a one-way conversation with her while she ate her tuna sandwich. I had initially hoped she might socialize with some of the other more talkative residents, and Dr. Sam had shared the same hope. Keep her stimulated, Dr. Sam said to me when I informed him of the move to tropical gardens. Get her out walking, engage her in as many activities as possible, find social opportunities for her. I can't stress how important that is. Easy for him to say. Let Dr. Sam come over and try to entertain her for 5 or 6 hours. You could have brought in Bradley Cooper, Dwayne Johnson, and Ryan Gosling to dance naked in Ma's room, and she still would have dozed off after 5 minutes.
Funny. It's true. Right?
Yeah,
That's
it was definitely true about my mom.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a really important aspect to touch on, like you said, the boredom aspect. My grandma lived in an assisted living home for a while, and then I worked at an assisted living home for 4 years. So I wasn't a hands-on caregiver, but I was around many caregivers and many residents throughout that whole time. And although when I was working there, I could go from resident to resident, but there's certain residents I'd sit with because I knew that like they don't have as much going on, and it might feel bored to sit with them for a bit of time, but I know they need that. Whether they're showing it or not, you being there is so helpful, physically sitting there with them. Or if they're not, there was a resident who I was very close with, but she doesn't speak. So we'd sit there and we'd still find ways to communicate. I'd sit there waiting for dinner with them, and I'd show a few things on my phone, some pictures or videos I know they would enjoy, but that's definitely very important to talk about, the boredom aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up the flip side of it, because I think the caregiver tends to feel like, oh, here I've gone all out to entertain mom and she's just falling asleep, but that mom at some level appreciates it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Andrea, anything else or?
I just wanted to thank Ruth for joining us and for writing this wonderful book. And
Thank you.
as a reader and a fellow author, I can't wait to read your next stuff. I'm really proud of you and congratulations. And thanks for being here tonight.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I'm flattered to have been invited. And thank you all for your time.
I want to echo Drea, because I feel like as a fellow Al's author, I'm like, yay, Ruth, she's got more coming. So, and I know you do too, Drea. So that's really awesome. You guys are rocking it really well. So that's cool. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I want to go ahead and kind of wrap it up, and I just want to say thanks to both Drea and Ruth. Thank you for being here. This was really wonderful, and I so appreciate that you could read so much and really great passages. Thank you, everybody. You can learn more and register for the next event, which is going to be poetry, because April is Poetry Month. So we'll be hearing from some pieces from Stealing Flowers from Neighbors, Bringing Art to Life, Storms of the Inland Sea, and we will have Sue Fagaldi-Lick, who's with us today. You'll be with us on that, and Margaret Stawawi, and Daniel Potts and Sherry Levine. So we've got some, and I guess, so Sue, yours is Gravel Road. Is that where we're going to be hearing from?
Probably.
So for all of you who are watching this or listening to this later, you can learn more and register for the next book in Chit Chat in the Aging and Amazing Community Books and Chit Chat channel, or if you're already receiving our emails, you'll be receiving notifications from AlzAuthors newsletter. And lastly, I just want to say you are not alone. One can sing a lonely song, but we chose to form a choir and create harmony. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for listening to Untangling Alzheimer's and Dementia, an AlzAuthors podcast. For more details on this episode, please see the show notes. If you enjoyed the podcast, please leave a review and subscribe to it on whichever platform you use to listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information on AlzAuthors, please visit AlzAuthors.com. While you're there, be sure to browse our online bookstore, where you will find hundreds of carefully vetted books on Alzheimer's and dementia. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Please email your thoughts on the podcast to AlzAuthors@gmail.com. We are a 501c3 charitable organization, totally reliant on donations to do what we do. If our authors' stories move you, please consider contributing to our cause. Remember, you are not alone. One can sing a lonely song, but we chose to form a choir and create harmony.
Hi, my name is Christy Byrne Yates, and I'm one of over 300 authors of AlzAuthors.com. I'm also a donor to AlzAuthors. I chose to participate in the monthly donation program because for me, it's easy and efficient. You can donate one time, monthly, or annually. Simply go to AlzAuthors.com/donate. So why do I donate? Let me tell you. The management team at AlzAuthors is such a dedicated and passionate group of volunteers who receive no financial compensation for their hard work. They've gathered and promoted amazing authors who share about their journeys authentically and in many forms. There are books for children, professionals, family caregivers, and for those who've been diagnosed with some form of dementia. AlzAuthors also produces rich content that is completely free through podcasts, special events, and a vibrant YouTube channel. Please consider donating to AlzAuthors today by going to AlzAuthors.com/donate. And remember, you are not alone.